Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Tim Fonseca and Simon Rossetter from Ringler. Thank you so much to you both for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt, for having us.
Thanks, Matt.
Excellent. So let's talk about the episode. Today, we're going to be talking about humanizing the settlement process. And you both have actually worked on a claim recently that is a great, I think, catalyst for our conversation today. So, Tim, let's start with you. Could you just briefly give our audience a Cliff Note version of what happened in this particular case?
Yeah, this case is like a lot of cases that we handle involving people who were injured. So, I had a client that was hurt on the job, suffered a bad injury, and that injury required medical treatment that continued throughout the duration of the case and into the future. And so, like a lot of these cases, we had to figure out how we were going to come up with the sum of money for the client in order to help him pay for this medical care and medical treatment that he was going to need for the rest of his life.
Geez. Okay. So a lot there, obviously, to unpack. So Simon, when did you get the call and how did you get involved?
Yeah, so Tim had called me very early on in this case, once he had a good understanding of what those future medical needs were going to be and what the future lost income was going to be. And from the very beginning, Tim had asked me kind of to start providing some evaluations for him as to what it might cost to provide those that future treatment for the client. It was very important for Tim to make sure that this client had ongoing funds to care for him in the future. And so that was when we kind of got started to make sure we were involved. How can we put together a plan that can make sure that Tim can get this case settled for a reasonable number and make sure that he was prepared and the client was prepared for the future?
Yeah, so let's dive in there. How do you do that, Simon? Because I would imagine when you have someone that is staring down a settlement and they're thinking about those big dollars, they probably haven't seen that amount of money before. They're not really sure what it means. Is that actually enough, especially in this case with, a lot of medical issues down the road that they have to manage and maintain? So how do you make that real for someone in that process that you do to give them a plan that's worth considering?
Yeah, so Tim obviously had his experts, life care planners, economists, that were really evaluating as medical experts as what this client needed going forward. And then from there, it's really just working with Tim to kind of set expectations of what that client wanted. Not too much after we kind of started talking numbers is when Tim got me involved directly with the client to start evaluating, well, what were their real needs outside of the medicals too? And really evaluating what this client needed in order to accept a settlement and be comfortable knowing that once this check comes in and the case is done, making sure that they were able to provide for themselves going forward.
And Tim, you obviously work with your clients to kind of get to that need-based allocation. Do you have a particular formula or something you work through to ensure that you kind of get the whole landscape of what's going on?
Yeah, Simon mentioned that, we had experts lined up. So we'll, as plaintiffs lawyers, we'll hire life care planning experts a lot of times. And that's a discovery tool. And we're trying to use that if we have to show a jury that this is the amount of money that this particular client's going to need at the end of their life or until for the rest of their life, rather. And that's kind of my top-down analysis. So I'll use that number as a starting point. And then I'll also do a bottom-up analysis, and I'll have a conversation with the client, and I'll say to them, and I'll start getting curious about what are your actual expenses. In this particular case, it involves somebody that, unfortunately was never going to be able to work again. And so the amount of money that we were going to come up with was really going to have to help provide cost of living for the rest of his life for him and his wife. And so that required getting into what's your mortgage cost, what's your car expense costs and all of that. What do you think you might expect to spend in a month or a year or whatever it may be? And then on top of that, what did I really think the cost of the medical care were going to be? And that helps me get like a bottom-up analysis. And ideally, in resolving a case for the client or figuring out what number they're going to need to settle the case, it's something in between the top-down analysis and the bottom-up analysis, and you try to get it within a range where you feel comfortable, recommending a settlement at the end of the day.
Okay. So help me understand this. So you said you bring in a lot of different experts. Is there a decision matrix fork in the road of when it comes to, hey, I'm going to call a financial advisor on this case, or I'm going to call a structured settlement consultant like Simon on this case? Do you do both? Do you do none? I mean, what does that process and the decision matrix look like in your mind?
Yeah, no, ideally, in my cases that I'm handling, what I learned through working with Simon for a number of years is that you do both. The structure, I don't give financial advice. I'm not a financial planner. I know the law very well. But what I do know is that 101 of financial planning is diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. And so even though a structure, they know that how to diversify, and that's how they get the growth in that money. It's one piece of a total puzzle to us and to our clients. So we'll try to connect them with a financial planner who on their own is diversifying and trying to figure out, how do I grow money over time? And a lot of times when we say to them, well, this is unique because this is a personal injury settlement, and what they might do always involves, or usually involves, taxable income and all of that kind of stuff. But what Simon's able to do, or what the structure is able to do, obviously is provide for financial growth that becomes non-taxable because it becomes an instrument through the settlement and all of that. And that's a tool that most financial planners don't have unless we provide it to them. So proper financial planning to me involves using both and just really empowering that financial planner with this really great tool that becomes non-taxable to try to help come up with a package for this client that's going to serve their needs into the future.
Yeah, and luckily Tim on this case had a very good person he worked with that kind of understood this, and it really wasn't as much a competition between the two of us, but a collaboration between the two of us. And Tim did a great job of figuring out what it was that we each needed to contribute as part of the settlement. But it also allowed, and I think Tim would agree with this, it also, the conversations that we had with the client and that the financial planner had with the client opened up a lot of information that maybe didn't come out just as part of trial prep, and really gave Tim an understanding of what the client truly wanted as part of the settlement. Maybe not just, I need X amount of dollars, or I need this at this time, but really have an understanding of what was making that client and what really was important to that client as part of the settlement process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
In this particular case, I mean, a lot of times we don't ask those questions, right? Because we're fixed on what's the number and, what's all of that. And it's easy to overlook, like, well, what's the client's actual needs and what are they looking for? And what are they, forget about the money, but what are they expecting their future to look like? And in the process of kind of, the financial planning and with Simon putting together the structure, there's usually a questionnaire process where they'll ask some of these basic questions and all of that. And, I looked at the responses to that questionnaire, and in retrospect, it seems so obvious, but I was completely oblivious where the client had identified really specific markers that were going to help him and his wife provide a life that was far more comfortable living for them in him dealing with the injury that unfortunately he sustained. And they were not apparent to me, but once I identified them, once we knew what they were, they made total sense. And fortunately, in this particular case, with Simon's help, we were able to come up with a financial plan and a structure that was able to provide those tools for this client to make his life more livable into the future.
I want to shift our conversation to maybe some nuances of the settlement process, specifically in the humanization of it. So we talk about plans, and as we know, best laid plans are subject to change, and it would be great if everyone had the same expectation that great plan, everyone agrees, good. Not always the case, as we know. So we are working with the other side in this case, and we're trying to get to that point. I'm hoping you could give us some insight into what can sidetrack the path towards an agreement between all the parties involved in the settlement.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer, so I'm always going to blame the insurance companies and say that they're cheap. That's where it starts. No, but, listen, a lot of times it has things that are completely outside of a client's control or a plaintiff's attorney's control. Insurance companies operate, they're administrative in their function, and sometimes the right adjuster might not have the paperwork that they need at the right time, or they might not have the authority, or they might not have evaluated the case properly, or whatever it may be. And it gets frustrating for us as plaintiffs lawyers because at representing clients, because it's separating this client from money at the end of the day, and there's nothing, it's no fault of their own. And so we're intentional about what we do, and the only thing that kind of can operate to serve as a hard deadline or a hard limit to that is getting a trial date at the end of the day, and being ready and being able and capable of trying a case to a conclusion. We've had success with me and my firm at taking cases to verdict and being successful with them. So, at the end of the day, the insurance companies know that either they're going to pay us or we're going to go to a verdict, and they might not like that result either. So it sort of forces them to get all those ducks in a row, put all of those administrative pieces in place that need to happen so that we start getting some settlement offers.
Yeah, so I think, and then kind of teeing off that, I think when we talk about, from my perspective, being the settlement planner, what am I doing, the settlement consultant? What am I doing to make sure that Tim's ready for that when those offers do come in? And it's really making sure that he has a good valuation of what that client needs. What can the structure provide? How does that fit into the bigger picture of a settlement plan for that client? And then making sure that he knows and his client's aware that when we do get that number, whatever it may be, right? Hopefully it's a big number that everybody's happy with, but what does that number need to be? And I think, in this case, we ran quite a few scenarios, Tim, on this one, so you were kind of ready. But yeah, we kind of went through many, many different scenarios of this. Is if they offer this, the client gets that. And one thing that Tim did a great job of in this case is really have an understanding of what his client was actually going to get from the settlement if those offers came in. I mean, a number of times we help negotiate cases or get involved, and at the end of the day, it's like, well, what's the client going to net? And they're like, I don't know, we're still waiting for a lien, we don't know this. Tim kind of planned that all out well ahead of time, so his client really had that true understanding of if they offer this, you're going to get this, and it's going to turn into this with the structure and with the financial plan, and you're going to be taken care of.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, and a lot of time, to be self-critical of the plaintiff side of this, a lot of times, and I get it, plaintiff's attorney, we're busy, we have, a big caseload, and, a lot of times we get called down to a settlement conference or a mediation, we may not be totally ready, or we forgot to get those medical bills, or the lien, the person that we're waiting for a lien for, they just haven't given it to us yet. But getting all of those things and being ready so that when that offer comes, you can say, okay, well, this is the amount of money that you're gonna put in your pocket at the end of the day, is a fundamental and necessary part of any settlement. And I've had these conversations with my client to kind of hold me accountable. And the first time I'll get an offer or discuss value with them, you give them the top number, of course, and they get all excited with that. But then there's the reality of there's attorney's fees, there's costs on the case, there's medical bills that they have to pay back. And so I challenge them to tell me, anytime I give them a settlement offer, hold me to how much money am I putting in my pocket, right? And I'm not going to blame them for being selfish or only thinking about themselves, because what they're really doing is holding me accountable to be able to do the math, to say, I figured out what the bills are going to be, I figured out what the lien is and all of this, and I can say with some sort of certainty that this is the amount that you're going to put in your pocket. And at the end of the day, that really should be the only number that, you care about or they care about, the clients. But if you're not prepared to do that math for the client and walk them down to what amount of money is the client putting in their pocket, you can't settle the case.
Yeah. And we've talked about the relationship that you've been able to develop with your client. You're close, you're working with them, you have a plan. But the other side, they don't have that insight. They don't have what they're looking at, and it's not an excuse. It's just more of like, I can see there being a disconnect between a formulaic approach and a more humanity approach. I'm wondering how that can get lost in those settlement discussions, and then how also do you mend that gap and bring it back to what it's all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. A lot of times, and it's no fault of their own. I used to do some defense work before I came over on the plaintiff side, but the insurance company or the defense lawyers, they might see the client one time for an hour or two at a deposition. They've been prepared for that deposition. It doesn't serve to truly humanize a client in that particular moment. But we as plaintiffs' attorneys, we've been dealing with them sometimes within, a short period of time after an accident. We see them come in, they're confused, they're lost, they don't know where to go. And so it's hard not to see them as humans from the very beginning. But you can also fall into the trap where you're looking at these cases and the insurance companies or defense lawyers will, look at a person, they'll look at their age, they'll look at the type of injury that they have, they'll look at the type of treatment they had this surgery or that, and it'll fit into, falls into a formula of on the low side it's valued at this, at the high side it's valued at that. That's where I have to get the case settled. And we can fall into that trap as plaintiffs lawyers too if we want to settle the case, because we have to kind of play by a similar type of analysis. Ours might be a little bit higher than they would like to be, but and do that. But what gets lost at the end of the day when doing that is the number is arbitrary to a client that is a real person that has actual needs and may need an actual plan going forward and all of that. And so, speaking to them, getting curious about, what are they using this money for? What is it that they need and all of that, especially in cases like Simon and I dealt with where we were going to be responsible, or the settlement was going to be responsible to pay for their medical costs for the rest of their lives, replace their job income and all of that. You really have to get curious with your client about how can we help? What are your needs? What are your functions? What are you looking for out of this? And that's a big part and a helpful part of the process.
Yeah, and it's I kind of have a slide in presentations I do that kind of talks about the difference between case management and settlement consulting, right? As an attorney, as an adjuster, you guys have so many responsibilities on a case in terms of filing deadlines and everything else that you've got to deal with the court and expert reports and taking depositions. When we get involved as settlement consultants, we do get to humanize that case a little bit more and ask some of those questions that are important to that client to know about. And here we ask some questions, and you touched on it earlier, Tim, about there were things that came out during the conversations that I had with your client and that the financial advisor had that were things that were kind of trigger points that we didn't really notice. And it was kind of interesting to see what that was. Some of it wasn't able to be touched on by the structure because we do provide that fixed guaranteed future income, but other things that we wanted to make sure there was cash available for at different times and stuff like that. So it was really an interesting process, but it's tough. I mean, a lot of times it comes down to numbers, especially as those negotiations continue. In the beginning, we all think about everything, and then as the negotiations continue, it really does become a numbers game, and making sure that client understands that in advance and knows that, these numbers, what do they mean? How are they going to affect my life? What does this mean that, okay, the case settled, but what do I really get out of it is really important.
Yeah, and a lot of times on the other side, they may be playing with that formula of the case is worth between X and Y, but they don't know that we're talking to the clients about, this means that you can function with this, you can have these different medical costs and all that stuff, and this is what's going to be left over and all of that. And we're dealing with the actual, needs of the clients, or we should be dealing with the actual needs of the clients versus, what some arbitrary, actuarial analysis of what this case is worth. And hopefully, X plus Y, equals Z, but, not always the case. There's a lot of different functions there and all of that, but yeah, it's in that process, in that fact-finding process of the financial plan, getting the structure and all of that a lot of that comes to light.
I love ending our time together with takeaways specifically, because we talked about and covered a lot between each of you, and it's been fantastic insights. Here's your moment. You're on a stage. You have 1,000 of your colleagues right in front of you in the legal world. What is the takeaway that they need to understand about this humanizing of the settlement process as a whole?
Yeah, from me and my perspective, representing injured folks, it's easy. It's think about the settlement structure, think about the financial plan before the settlement. A lot of times we fall into this trap where we'll get a settlement offer or the case will settle and all that, and we go, oh, great. And you're getting the release sign and all that, and you go, oh, wait a minute, I got to get a structure. And I'm calling Simon on the phone and saying, hey, can you run the numbers on this? And, Simon's a magician, so he'll put it all together to me when I ask. I don't know how happy he is with me, but he does it, and it's great. But the function in this case that truly helped was getting Simon, getting the structure in place, getting the financial plan in place way before the case was settled, way before the case maybe was even ready to settle, so that we were armed before the mediation process even started, before the first mediation process even started, with what is this going to look like at various settlement amounts. And so what we did in this particular case was we ran financial analysis using Simon's structure on every settlement offer that we were going to ultimately recommend or that fell short of that. For this particular client, no one knew about it, no one needed to know about it, but it sat in my trial bag, with all of the other evidence that I had, never to be exchanged with the other side. But when the judge comes in and they communicate a number and say, this is what we're willing to pay, we say, thank you very much, and the door closes, we'll get back to you. We could pull out that financial plan and the structure and all of that and see exactly how that money is going to grow over time at that number. We could think about how we're going to respond to that, how we're going to negotiate, and how we're going to get to that. So it gave us a tremendous amount of confidence as a tool in our belt to confidently be able to set a client's expectation and show that what that number actually meant for them going forward the rest of their life. So it's get them involved early before the settlement ideally and use it as a tool to help you settle the case.
Yeah, so I think my takeaway from all of this is that we do a lot of cases, and I think it's important to understand that there is a person behind each of these plans we put together, and Tim getting me involved early in this case gave me a better opportunity to really get to know those clients, really have an understanding of what their needs are, collaborate with the financial advisor on this case. A lot of times you hear that structured settlement consultants and financial advisors are competing, and it really shouldn't be that way. We both offer a product and products that can help clients in these cases, and working together with the financial advisor on this case really did put a plan together where we realized the structure has some strengths, but it also has weaknesses. The financial plan had a lot of strengths, but it also had weaknesses where the structure could fill those. And it put together a plan for the clients that I know when Tim was negotiating, because we're still going back and forth while he's at trial negotiating this case, and knowing that we could go there and at the end of the day, he was able to put an offer in front of the client and say, hey, listen, we've got everything you need. Everything you've asked for is going to be taken care of. And then fortunately for Tim, it was everything they needed and some, because he did a great job getting a good number on the case. But it really meant that client knew that their life was taken care of. It wasn't just, hey, sign this release, good luck, here's your check. It was making sure that they really did have a plan in place and knew that they were going to be able to take care of themselves going forward.
Tim, Simon, really appreciate both of your time. Thank you so much for your insights. Fantastic conversation. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Matt.